Well, morena tato. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our agenda and workshop today being the 12th of February. Can I please invite Bill to open us with a karakia this morning?
Thanks, Susan. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, ki ama kina ki ruta, ki ama tata ki tai. I ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he haua, ti hei Māori ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Bill. Welcome, Roger, online. We see you there, and I'm fairly certain we can hear you. Do you just want to say something, so check that I can hear you?
Yes, at least doing this, I don't have to remember to turn the microphone on. But I do wonder, I'm going to have to leave at some time during this meeting, I'm not sure when, but I just wonder if the paper that I distributed to the councillors could be tabled as being received, so the comments in that paper are acknowledged.
Yeah. Hey, look, thank you, Roger, for all your hard work and diligence there. I think Mike Pettit even acknowledged that via email, which was much appreciated, as always, fleshing out some of the pertinent things that we would like answers on. So we're all fully aware of your email and your questions and the answers that staff have provided. And as it's a workshop, tabling it won't be required, but certainly acknowledge the hard work and receipt of and answers given to that work. Thank you very much, Roger. And yeah, as you've indicated, just sneak away when you need to, but look forward to your contributions in the meantime.
Yep.
Fantastic. All right, without any further ado, I shall pass the talking paddle over to our team at the end there, Dawn and Carl. Lovely to see you both again, and really looking forward, actually, before I do that, to this discussion, and maybe as it sort of dawned on me recently that there's sort of probably a bit of a context timeline that might be a little bit helpful in understanding how we got to today of recent times. So I guess I just wanted to stress that many of you realise that water reform is not a new issue. It's been an issue that's been trickling around, excuse the pun, local government for decades. There have always been ongoing or regular discussions around sustainability, affordability, resilience, and at times questions around levels of investment. Over the years, there have been various packages of reform and iterations of those mooted by successive governments. Fast forward, of course, to today, where we have a legislative framework which forces us really to confront these issues and to find solutions on a voluntary basis. So the journey in the recent past began essentially in about mid-2023 with discussions between the Mayoral Forum and the Iwi Chairs Forum. And those discussions centred around what does success look like for Waikato Water Services reform. Out of that, those discussions, the Mayoral Forum directed work to be done through CoLab, and they worked up options which provided essentially a two-stage process. The first stage was to be a non-asset owning model with a view to transition to an asset owning model in time. That's a very quick nutshell of that paper. That paper had full support from the Waikato councils. However, in February 2024, Waikato was advised by Watercare that their contract to supply water, wastewater and stormwater services was to cease by June 2026, subsequently was extended by a year. So that obviously put some particular pressure on them to focus their thinking on what the future lay for them. Short time later that year, in July, Hamilton City then advised of their need to withdraw from the Waikato Water Done Well work stream as the timeframes that were offered in that paper, namely the stage 1, stage 2 process, didn't offer them the solutions and relief they need in the timeframe that they needed it. And it's really important, I guess, at this point to acknowledge that there were different drivers for all councils to different extents. Then in November of that year, our council approved entering into the heads of agreement with Waikato Water Done Well, but also acknowledged there needed to be further work done in parallel in terms of that sub-regional model. At the same time, we indicated that stage 2, straight to asset owning, was probably our preference at that time. Now, in and around that time, there was quite a movement in other councils too to actually realise that actually stage 2 offered us greater impact and skipped stage 1. It's also really important to note that Hamilton City and Waikato's opting out and to step away from the Waikato Water Done Well was motivated by their individual and unique drivers. The Waikato Water Done Well model was the original body of work, and it continued in their absence. There was definitely no political bad blood over this. It was simply a case of each organisation doing what it had to with their set of circumstances at the time. And I also want to flag there that during that time, at a governance level, the city always made it very clear that their door was always open to us in terms of ongoing discussions in regards to that sub-regional model. So look, with that sort of nutshell of the history up until today, I just wanted to also stress that, again, this isn't a decision-making environment. Our formal decision about which will be our preferred option to consult with our community will take effect on the 26th of February. But I also wanted to just remind us all that this is a once-in-lifetime change. There's no set precedent. There's no rule book beyond the legislation we have, which, as we'll find later, is evolving as we walk. And as such, there are unknowns. There are some aspects or information that may seem or feel incomplete or uncertain. Such is the nature of this, and in particular, this reform. This is complex, this is large, and this is impactful. And I really want to echo a couple of comments that have been made over the last few weeks, that on account of this sort of evolving situation, it's somewhat like plaiting fog. And to that end, I really think it's about relationships and thinking strategically with that long lens in mind to ensure that we set up the best systems to accommodate infrastructure into our future and for future generations. So look, with that sort of scene setting piece out of the way, I shall pass over to the Brains Trust at the end of the room here. And obviously we have the memorandum in front of us, which is really comprehensive and full. And thank you, and I thank you for the team's work in that regard.
Morena koutou, and thank you, Ms. Susan, for setting that scene, and that's a great reminder in terms of exactly that journey that we've been on to this place. We are working with incomplete information. Because of the pace of where we're going, we are working with the information we've had. And as we work through this, we will speak to areas where we've been able to get consistency of assumptions, consistency of outputs that we can do an analysis and bring that to you. But always recognising that there are some underpinning assumptions, some inputs that are incomplete, but as complete as they possibly can be at this time. We have a whiteboard here as well, so if there are any questions or anything that arises today that we want to capture, we will do so that we make sure that we incorporate that information back to you at the decision-making report that we'll bring to you later this month. So to continue with the scene setting, so today is really in terms of providing you with that further analysis and the assessment of our options with the view to establishing what is our preferred option at the decision-making report, and that will be presented to Council on the 26th of February 2025. And as Ms. Susan said, you know, a critical decision for Waipa in terms of understanding all of the implications, considerations that need to go into that decision-making process. I think we all acknowledge that it's not an ideal timeline in terms of the pace of the program, but the government have provided us with this opportunity to drive this locally, but within a prescribed timeframe that we have to have a water services delivery plan delivered to them by the beginning of September 2025. So what we're going to go through today is a bit of an outline in terms of all the work we've done. So from the 26th of November, when we signed up for the Waikato Water Done Well Heads of Agreement, and the Martin Jenkins report outlined to us that our two preferred options for further analysis should be the Waikato Water Done Well CCO and the sub-regional CCO, the two council CCO that's proposed between Hamilton and Waikato District. So working through what those options look like, what that analysis tells us, what's the same, what we believe are the distinguishing factors between them, what each of those options would provide us in terms of the strengths, and then working through some further considerations in terms of points that you might like to consider in terms of leading through to that decision. So again, just that looking backwards, we've kind of documented here what that timeline's sort of worked through, and very much in terms of reflecting back some of the presentations we've received from other parties, particularly Michael Brewster at Taswater, and some of the insights that they have provided on international experience that equally helps inform, you know, what a good practice, good quality CCO or utility provider can provide for consumers. I think we've reflected on those other sort of considerations. And then it was on the 13th of December when Waikato District Council made that decision to leave Waikato Water Done Well. And the workshop that we are having today in terms of discussing these outcomes. And that is the work ahead of us in terms of, for Waipa District Council, working towards that, getting our water services delivery plan into the DIA on that required timeline. I guess the greater context there as well is recognising that once we have a preferred option and move to consultation with our community and work through that process, from there it is going to be again another very complex piece of work for our organisation in terms of ensuring we are an effective partner in whichever CCO model is going to be established. So just to be very clear in terms of the two options that we are exploring is whether Waipa becomes a part of what's currently seen as a 2-council CCO, but the 3-council CCO that we've named the sub-regional CCO, versus the Waikato Water Done Well CCO, which is 7 councils across the Waikato region. The analysis that we've undertaken to date, and in front of you is an A3 copy, or it was also included in the memo that was provided to elected members, is an outline of the strategic objectives that each of the councils had across the sub-regional CCO, so that we started in that place to say, are we strategically aligned across those areas? All 3 parties we're doing due diligence in this space, because it's not just Waipa coming into that relationship. Equally, those partners were having to do due diligence and look at what Waipa's position was, what impact that would have on what they were developing up as a 2-council CCO. So that was looking at their critical success factors and the objectives at that highest level. We then had detailed discussions about CapEx programs in terms of the size and components that were within the 2-council CCO CapEx program, how that aligned with work in the Waipa, our program, in terms of what's in our long-term plan that we want to deliver for our communities. Flowing through into what does that mean for the financials. The 2-council CCO had a financial position, and as I say, again, it was a matter of looking at that in terms of the impacts from Waipa being incorporated into that. Because Hamilton and Waikato had been in conversations for some time, within their record of agreement, they had delved down into how transition might look like for their CCO in terms of the pressure that Waikato District were under of having a CCO operational on the 1st of July 2026. But equally, the fact that they were moving from a contracted model with Watercare into a council CCO is that what that looked like. And so the opportunity that's provided and within the record of agreement is a a high level of shared services being provided by Hamilton City to the CCO to help that transition process. The two council CCO had prepared, or the partners had prepared, a business case, and again that is now being finalised so that we can provide that to you with the decision report, as including an addendum with Waipa's inclusion into that. With respect to Waikato Water done well, so the remaining councils within that, that grouping who had signed up to the heads of agreement, they've been continuing on. The financial model that they have developed is a pretty robust. We've tested, challenged, poked, prodded, and found it to be very robust. It's been developed through CoLab. They've had a modeler, a financial modeler who has helped develop that model, who was recently in Las Vegas, where he became 8th in the world for his modeling skills. So that's the caliber of people and experts that we've had alongside the gentleman sitting alongside me, who's been testing and challenging that to ensure that it's as robust as we need for our decision making. Big commitments around weekly meetings, very early mornings, in terms of Steph participating in meetings with other CEs, but certainly a highly collaborative approach in terms of working through what Waikato Water done well might look like or mean for our communities. Me, Susan, equally a high level of participation in workshops with counterparts in terms of understanding that this is very much a leadership conversation across the region as well, in terms of what this decision is in terms of that once in a lifetime, and ensuring that we are that leadership is evident, and it most certainly is. Communications and engagement. So there's been a lot of discussion in terms of how do we ensure that our communities are both aware of this work, but then equally have good opportunities to engage, to understand, and to provide feedback. So that's been a key work stream within those meetings and conversations as well. And it started with work prior to Christmas, where we got an education and awareness campaign underway in terms of kōrero why, and starting to sort of, I guess, at least start with our community to understand what the waters business means to them in terms of a public health thing, but where does it come from? How is it treated? All those sorts of things, so that I understand that it's not just what falls from the sky, that where there is a whole heap of work needed in terms of ensuring that it's both treated to our public health standard that we can all enjoy safely, but then treated to an appropriate standard that we discharge it to either to our awa or to our whenua in terms of discharges across the region. So yeah, so lots of conversations and lots of work have been going on, and between that there's been a bit of a Christmas period as well, where some people have managed to kind of get a bit of a break. But yeah, it's been full on. Alongside this, the government have also been releasing legislation that we've participated in, and you'll recall the submissions that we provided on what is now known as the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai, and Commerce Commission, in terms of the levies that they are going to be placing upon water services providers, and insights as to the implications of a much higher regulated environment that our waters activities, wherever they sit, will be subject to. So when we kind of talk about the current state or the status quo, in the future it's going to be very, very different to what we currently experience in terms of those regulations and that oversight from those central agencies. Just prior to Christmas as well, we received the what we call Bill 3, the Local Government Water Services Bill, which really starts to outline those enduring settings for what water service providers and water services organisations need to comply with. And as I say, later in the workshop, we'll be working through what that looks like. When we speak of our leadership and are very aware in terms of our relationships across the region, in terms with Mayor Paula and Mayor Jackie, and if looking at the sub-regional CCO, and equally the mayors across the Waikato Water done well whānau in terms of, you know, they are our leaders who are helping support these work streams. Starting to drop down to analysis and kind of, I spoke about it earlier in terms of we've been very, very clear in terms of the fact that we're in this position of having to assess these two options, that we wanted to bring you analysis that is very much apples with apples. So that's been a key part of the work in terms of how might we understand this, have consistent assumptions across both of the options to get to this point. So a real like for like. So just to be very clear, because we are working on a long-term plan, a draft long-term plan, there had to come a point where we said, right, that is the document that we are using in both of these pieces of work. That was pretty much in early December is that information. So I know that subsequent to that, we have now sort of adopted what will be our draft long-term plan, and we need to keep in mind that that will have to come back through in terms of doing that analysis as we move through into consultation. Not significant changes, but some changes that we'll just have to ensure are brought through into our preferred option. The other one in terms of transition impacts. So neither CCO is fully formed. Neither CCO has how this will look, how this will work. So transition is something that will have to happen early. But just to be clear, there are no firm plans in terms of what that looks like or who is doing what within each of the CCO options. However, we have had to make some assumptions around it, and just to be very clear in terms of what that looks like. So it's very early thinking, and equally some of the inputs into that is how might each of the partners in each of the CCOs start to consider things like, what does the residual council look like? What does stranded overheads look like? What if some of those residual costs, how might we mitigate the risk through that? So as I say, not delve to any detail whatsoever, but just that I guess that awareness that we are turning our minds to it. But equally, it's not having a significant impact in terms of the options, in terms of how they're presented. I know we've spoken about this previously in terms of some of the prior legislation and insights that have been provided through workshops and papers last year. But in the formation of a CCO, council will transfer its water and wastewater assets to a council-controlled organisation. And under the legislation, it has to be a limited liability company. However, council will still have the ability to influence. Very clear that the CCO, whichever option CCO we have, will be what is called the plan taker. That council will still be in that driver's seat in terms of setting our strategic land use patterns, and then working alongside our CCO in terms of understanding what delivery options for that will be appropriate. So through various mechanisms, but primarily there will be what's called a shareholder council on the slide, also called a shareholder forum, to just be completely sort of clear in terms of that it is a forum of representatives from the participating councils who have a few key responsibilities. They appoint the board. So in other words, they get that oversight in terms of who is appointed to the board, and then develop up a statement of expectations in terms of what they are looking for the CCO to deliver for our communities. When we look at both CCO options, both of them are establishing on the 1st of July 2026. With respect to Waikato Water Done Well, conversations are in terms of how might the various councils transition into the CCO, but at this stage, certainly the CCO would be fully established and everybody would be committed to participating in the CCO as at that date. Both will be asset owning for water and wastewater, so all of the assets and the debt and the operational staff will transfer into that CCO organisation for water and wastewater. For stormwater at the bottom there, what we have talked about previously is that we believe there are real benefits that our stormwater activity is managed very closely alongside our water and wastewater activities. So that is things like our activity management functions. We have some real synergies. So whilst stormwater also has a huge interest for other activities within council in terms of our parks and reserves, our transport in terms of key corridors for managing stormwater, we believe that a contracted service where the stormwater function is managed within the CCO is most appropriate. So that's the arrangement that we're looking at, but that the assets and debt would sit back with council, and that matches with the legislation as well, or the draft legislation. So again, CCO partners are outlined there. And both CCOs, when we get into talking about the financials, is that all of our currently planned investment is delivered. So there are no constraints coming back from the CCO saying we cannot deliver any parts of the program. So it gives us a level of confidence that as I say, the CCOs are both in a position to be able to deliver on what we proposed through our long-term plan. I spoke about where we don't have full information. And I know that through our long-term plan, there's been a lot of consideration about affordability constraints that are impacting in our communities, and that we had looked to what are becoming more better known sort of international, national metrics around comparing the cost of service against median household incomes. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to provide you with that information at this time. So that's one of those gaps, but I do believe that it's something that we need to keep in the forefront of my mind as we do further work in this area.
Dawn, can I just interrupt there? I think Claire has a question for you.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. Just on this slide, there are a few things that, I just wanted to sort of delve into a bit more deeply. So with the affordability, I totally agree that this is something that, we've got to be really, focused on for our communities. And my understanding is that there's a bit of a difference between the two models as to their measure of affordability. That like the one that Waipa has adopted for all the LTP work has been 2% of average household income or median household income. But for the sub-regional one, it's actually set at 2.5%. So there's a slight difference there. I mean, the calculation I did could mean a difference of about $600 a year for between the Waipa approach and that one, for an average water user. But that has to be taken in the whole mix, obviously. And the other thing I wanted to comment on was, the long-term savings or the efficiency modelling. Now, this is something that I was pretty intrigued with, and we did have the opportunity to sort of quiz some of the different teams on their approach there. And for example, for the Waikato Water Done Well team said, I did ask them for specific examples that they could give of where the savings might be achieved. And that gave me a lot of comfort because it was clear to me that they had had a good look at how their individual council businesses were arranged, but also where the opportunities were by working together that they could actually make some good savings. So where they mentioned examples of, needing to do regular visits to the actual water treatment plants and that one of them was a lot closer to one council's headquarters actually than the actual owning council and things like that. And it just, and the other thing that came through clearly also was the catchment-based approach that the Waikato Water Done Well proposal is offering. And that also seemed to provide a pretty good picture of the level of savings and efficiencies there. So I felt that was really helpful. Just things that we don't have full information on, or that I feel is really important to our community, is how customer issues or complaints, customer voice, and that kind of thing is going to be dealt with. Now, we heard clearly that the intention of both models is that councils will continue to be the first to go to place for anyone to raise a water issue with. Is that correct? You know, that we still will have that facility, people just phone their local council if they do have a question or a problem. Yeah, and I presume that's for both where you've got an urgent issue that needs, you know, like a leak or something, or a flood, but also where you feel that you're not getting the level of service that you expected. I'm just wondering if you could just clarify that a bit, because I do think that's something that will be very important to our community.
Thank you. With respect to the I guess that customer interaction with the CCO, certainly I think that for a number of our customers, it'll take some time to build an awareness that council's no longer the go-to point. And so I think it's reflecting the reality that for a number of people, they will still come to council. So whilst they will receive an invoice for service, we will try and engage with our community as strongly as possible to inform them that there is now this other channel in terms of and responsibility, is that equally council will have to have a very strong operating relationship still in that space to ensure that we're able to receive that, pass it to a CCO. The CCO equally is effective at responding. And I would anticipate that in our statement of expectations that there would be very clear requirements around how our community is served and those sorts of things, and that we would anticipate that within the CCO there would be opportunities for customers to be able to escalate as needed. But I also think under the purview of the Commerce Commission, they are going to take a very strong interest in terms of, is the CCO delivering both from a technical perspective in terms of all of those requirements, from an affordability perspective, but equally delivering to a level of service that they've made a promise about to their communities. With respect to the CCO, certainly in terms of the long-term saving estimates, I might ask Carl to comment on that one. But with respect to the efficiency modelling, when we say it was only done for Waikato Water Done Well, and referencing back to the financial model that they created. So a couple of things is that we heard from Watercare in terms of the level of efficiency savings that they've been able to achieve, which is around 4% per year, and an ongoing target at that level. So within the Waikato Water Done Well, they've gone quite conservative, but said that if those efficiency gains, they are planning on 1% per annum efficiency gain across the CCO. And that would be holistically. So we can't say what the benefit, direct benefit to Waipa consumers is, but across all of the CCO. But equally, they have included a sum which is invest to save. So within the programs of work, there is an amount of money that can be invested to really pursue those efficiency gains. So where those opportunities are for sort of immediate gains in terms of how services are delivered and those sorts of things, absolutely. But then equally, there is money to say, well, you know, if we introduce this system, there's a cost to that, but direct benefit in terms of sort of medium to longer term gains. But
Yep. So just expanding on that. So the Waikato Water Done Well model assumes 1% OPEX and 1% CAPEX savings per annum cumulatively. So that peaks at 15% over a 10 to 15 year period. So it ramps up over time. And by the 15-year window, the cumulative savings net of those save investments is in the order of $330 odd million cumulatively off the cost of the program and therefore the cost to the consumers. As Dawn said, based on international and Auckland experience, that 1% is reasonably conservative, but obviously the details need to be worked through as we or as that entity develops over time and develops budgets and those sort of things, but certainly achievable from international experience.
Lou.
Yeah, Dawn, I'm very interested in what we're talking about here. This is a very, as I say, a very important decision to be making. The one thing that I wanted to develop a little bit was the fact that when are we going to be front-facing? There seems to be a disparity between the two options when they are front-facing, because I believe that under the first option, the regional cost, it'll remain under the auspices of Hamilton City Council, and when for 5 years or 4 or 5 years it will start operating, and perhaps we are a little bit quicker with that. The second thing I wanted to define was stormwater. Stormwater will be actually at a cost of our council. It's not going to be a CCO thing. They contract to us to do it, correct? Under that, under the Resource Management Act and also under the Civil Defence Act, we as a council are going to be responsible under the Act to actually negotiate and actually observe and operate that. So there is going to be 2 pieces of legislation. And the final bit I wanted to ask is, you said that the new legislations that we're facing for the quality of water, okay, is going to be very improved. Will the facilities that we've got now comply in the future, or will we have to actually review those all again? And how many of those are going to have to be reviewed or actually upgraded?
Thank you, Councillor. Maybe starting in terms of, I know you mentioned in terms of the stormwater aspect, and it's certainly a conversation that was live even this morning in terms of from a civil defence emergency management sort of response and recovery, is the relationship with our CCO is going to be critical in terms of how we ensure that is still effective and able to operate in any emergency environment. So you're absolutely right in terms of those implications and tentacles are there. With respect to the standards that we currently deliver, Waipa's infrastructure is meeting current requirements. So the only sort of, I guess, proviso I put on that is that in the consents that we hold for wastewater treatment in particular, those consents have review periods within them that they will require us to re-look at standards and commitments at those points. So case in point, Te Awamutu wastewater treatment plant 2030 is requiring another significant investment to meet the standards and capacity requirements at that time. So, you know, there will be that requirement for ongoing investment, but at this stage, we don't believe that there is anything signalled in the legislation that is going to change our current planning arrangements.
Just carry on with that discussion on stormwater, just one thing that as a joint committee, regional joint committee, and one of our responsibilities is reduction of risk. And that is something that we would have to, as an executive or as a committee, actually have an oversight or review and reducing the risk from stormwater and having that. So there would be a link here between local councils, CCOs, and of course the committees, the joint committees that we sit on. So that's something that has to be considered in the future, particularly with the events that we have to see.
No, I absolutely agree.
Claire.
Thanks. I just wanted to go back to the efficiency modelling because we were talking about Waikato Water done well, but with the sub-regional model, those efficiencies are also expected to be available, aren't they? In fact, you might like to comment on the different scales.
Yep. So the sub-regional CCO financial model doesn't include any efficiencies or any investor save investments. The working hypothesis for that model is that because they have a longer transition period and a focus on not transitioning all of their shared services to the CCO until about 3 to 5 years after 2026, that any efficiencies that might be obtained are later in the forecast period, so into the early 2030s, and they've therefore ignored them from the model.
So I've shared with you a hard copy and as in the memo in terms of our strategic objectives information. So this was built from the work that was undertaken by Martin Jenkins, Becker and Maffick and presented to you in November last year, that outlined what were the strategic priorities and objectives that Waipa needed in terms of starting to look at what options and how we might consider those options available to us under the legislation. And that was at that point we moved into the path of looking at a CCO option, either sub-regional or Waikato Water done well. So what we've done is taken those and we've tested them against the strategic objectives, critical success factors that the other partners had, and incorporated those into that material. But the very clear finding from it is that we are strongly aligned. And that's not unexpected because we're all of us wanting to serve our communities well and delivering a water service business. So those critical success factors, those strategic objectives would always be anticipated as being very similar. Where we've talked about the partially meets objective for the sub-regional CCO, that starts really to delve into some of these financial impacts. So what we did is started in that place, produced that material, but then said, okay, what we really need to focus on is these distinguishing factors. So I will hand over to Carl to speak to some of the financial aspects.
We've probably covered some of this, but I'll just go over some of it again. So the financial models for both of the CCOs have been independently prepared. So the sub-regional CCO model was originally prepared under the two-council CCO option for Hamilton and Waikato by Deloitte. They have been engaged to update that model to reflect a three-council CCO, including Waipa. So the numbers that are in the memo report that you've received are all prepared by Deloitte. On the Waikato Water model, that financial model, as Dawn said earlier, has been prepared through CoLab by an independent expert modeller with some fairly high credentials. And we have also performed some testing of that model and some back and forward conversation to refine it. So we are comfortable that they're both robust models and that the outputs are comparable and reliable. The inputs to both, obviously the model outputs are dependent on the inputs. The inputs of both models are effectively the respective councils' LTPs, or in our case, the draft LTP. And have gone through a process of checking to make sure that the investment programs that are included in those LTPs are reasonably complete, given that some of those LTPs were prepared a year ago. The sub-regional model includes an allowance for additional growth infrastructure that Waikato and Hamilton had agreed to bring in on top of what's in their LTPs. Most of that infrastructure was planned in the second decade and is now into the period through to 2034. So that's in the order of $400 million of additional capital spend over and above what's in their base LTPs, which goes to closing debt for that CCO. And then the similar exercise was done for Waikato Water Done Well CCO, and there's a handful of tens of millions of dollars of additional investment included in that model over and above what was in the base LTPs. I think the number is in the order of 45 million. It's also worth noting that for Waikato Water Done Well, it's 7 councils. So the risk of there being material understatement in a council's investment program is spread, whereas the sub-regional one is more concentrated because of the population concentration. So, which is probably why why the Hamilton and Waikato investment number is significantly larger. Also, it reflects the fast track investments that Hamilton and Waikato are expecting to kick off in the next period. So as Dawn said earlier, both of the models include all of Waipa's planned investment. So there's no issue with the investments that we're expecting to make still being made under either model. Both models reflect compliance with the expected debt to revenue constraint that will be applied to the CCOs and have available headroom for additional investment or for moderating price paths in the future, in the order of $600 to $800 million over the period. The important differentiating factor is that the sub-regional CCO relies on an average price rise in the order of 10% per annum, which is the average across the 3 contributing councils, whereas the Waikato Water Done Well model has an average price rise of 4.6% cumulatively over the period, which effectively means that on average the customers are paying less in 2034 under the Waikato Water model versus the sub-regional model. It should be noted that average is a cumulative effect of adding the LTPs together. So it wouldn't necessarily, the level of benefit to the Waipa communities would depend on how the actual price path effects are effectively rolled out by the CCO in the future and how those prices may or may not be harmonised across the region. So take the numbers as indicative, but the key thing is that there's a lower revenue requirement because other councils have debt headroom under the Waikato model versus the sub-regional model. Yep.
Yeah, Monty.
Keep it interesting by asking questions. The Waikato Water's Done Well model capital program, when you bolted together all the LTPs, and you said about 40 million got added in. We were one where we were a bit of a moving target there with our capital program sort of being pruned back and then some stuff put back in over the 10-year period to make sure that we'd got on top of our renewals and stuff. Just can you talk to us a bit about that 40 million and is it across all those councils? Is it sort of fairly fair that were they on restricted capital budgets or their desired capital budgets, or just a bit of a comment around there, how you're feeling on that?
Yeah, so the Waipa capital budget is effectively the LTP numbers, the final draft LTP numbers. So there's no additional capex in the model for Waipa because we're basing it on the numbers that effectively are in the draft LTP. The other 40 million was as a result of councils the other parties identifying what they called should do's rather than must do's. So it's not a blue sky, what would we like to do budget? It's a what do we expect the regulation in the future would require us to do that we haven't got in our LTP, or things that we should do for compliance that we haven't currently got in our LTP. That answers your question?
Yeah, it does. That's good. Okay.
Thanks, Carl. Claire?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm thinking about the Waikato Water Done Well model covering the 7 councils. So what's the risk? Because I'm aware that the level of information about the assets, some of them, they weren't able to have a great deal of confidence as to the state of the condition of their assets. So I'm just wondering what is the risk that even though, you know, there's been a pretty reasonable process going through to set those budgets, that there will be unexpected things coming through because the condition of the assets may be improved, you know, with CCO. So are we sort of facing a sleeping giant in that respect? Like, do you think the debt headroom that is in that model would easily cater for any of those surprises? Yeah, so be good. I think you've given us an indication before as to the scale of what it might be, and yeah, whether or not it would be material, or could it sort of have a big impact on those numbers for us?
Yeah. So what we haven't done is gone and audited any of the other councils' investment programs. And so it's a trust model to a degree that those councils have gone through their LTP process and established what they think their investment program is. We have given them the opportunity or challenged them, whichever term you want to use, as to, is there anything else that you think should be in here that you haven't got in it because of whatever constraint? And that's happened on both models. So as I said, the sub-regional parties have identified that they think there's $400 million of additional growth infrastructure they need to bring into their plan. And on the other side, it's $40 million of compliance or renewal investment. In terms of the risk, my thinking would be that the chances of 7 councils having a cumulative material impact in the same period is probably reduced compared to a smaller number of councils. And I'd also say that the debt headroom number that's in Waikato Water Done Well is about the same size as the identified capital program. So at one level, you've got the ability to double the capital program and still be compliant with your debt to revenue ratio with a price rise that's lower than the sub-regional model. So if I put those things together, I would say there's reasonable comfort that that's affordable, and that we can, that CCO could manage risk of unidentified capex.
Thanks, Carl. And just on the forecast price rises in the sub-regional model, the price rises in the earlier part of that 10-year period is a lot higher, like the average is about 15%. So, and in my way of thinking, you know, if we were going to look at joining later, yeah, it might be a better option, but from the affordability side. Yeah, that was in the business case that was circulated.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was. Yeah,
Yeah,
great questions, Claire.
Mm.
Carl, can I just also ask you to comment on to Claire's first point about the integrity of the information supplied to Waikato Water Done Well? That, of course, every council is going to have its water services plan signed off by the DIA this year prior to entrance into any CCO, which is going to be a further test of that investment framework and plan going forward too, isn't it? Would you like to comment on that?
That's correct. So yeah, they will have to have identified what a business as usual delivery model would look like, and DIA will be challenging if they don't agree with the investment program that they've included under that model. So that will be an additional test. And DIA has also already had been involved in reviewing the Waikato Water Done Well model through CoLab. And I'm not aware that they've identified, I'm aware they haven't identified any material deficiencies in the capital program at this point.
Thanks, Carl. I have Mike Pettit and then you, Lou.
Thank you. I've got two questions. One sort of will help me inform the next one. Our wastewater treatment plant in Cambridge, did we go minimum standard or did we go above minimum standard in terms of what we're developing over there? Just a yes, no, it's fine.
There is currently no such thing as a minimum standard.
Right.
There is a working with our partners, iwi and mana whenua partners, understanding regional council's aspirations, our commitment to Turi Whaimana, the vision and strategy for the river. It ends up in a place in terms of what might we absolutely minimise the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that we're discharging to the awa. So in terms of what we're achieving, it's a very good standard of discharge, but I would be reluctant to term it a minimum standard.
Right, so it sounds like it's above what could be a minimum standard. So my next question then is, off the back of Claire's one, and the information that councils are sending through the LTPs or what they think we need to spend on waters, is there an agreed methodology or an agreed standard? Because a lot of us is going to be pump stations, etc. If I think of Waikato, they've got about 10 or 11 of them. So are we all on the same page here of what the figures we've put into a standard we're going to reach, or are we sort of all over the place? Because being all over the place, I can see big disparities, particularly if we have to liaise with, there is actually no minimum standard, which really surprises me. Don't know why the government doesn't do that. So what's the answer there? Are we all on the same page in terms of what we're put into our LTPs in terms of these assets, but really water pump, wastewater treatment plants, because they're big ticket items?
The government has turned their mind to it, and the legislation does start to talk about minimum performance standards for, but to be absolutely clear, that is in the absence of where we have JMA agreements or commitments such as the Turi Whaimana in terms of what we are contributing to the awa. The one thing that within Waikato Water Done Well are promoting and working very hard on is to look at point discharges versus catchment contributions. And we believe that and it's been an ethos here in Waipa for a long time in terms of wanting to understand that in terms of contribution. But there is very much, I think, an opportunity, I guess, in terms of through whichever CCO, but to absolutely pursue that. I think all councils will be operating within consents at the moment, possibly expired consents, but operating within consents that will be dictating what that standard of investment is. So, I'm absolutely confident in terms of their investment plans will reflect what they know now in terms of that commitment to delivering on their consent requirements.
Right, thanks for that, Dawn. Yeah, I've got some other stuff here, but it's probably not for today, but you've actually helped answer that catchment approach rather than just exit points, which seem ridiculous. Thank you.
Cheers, Mike. Steph, did you want to add something
I just
further
want
there?
to say I think that's a great response from Dawn, but also remembering that we're about to enter into a new phase of a regulatory framework, which will be based against Te Mana o Te Wai, Te Mana o Te Tangata. But that regulatory framework, you've got Taumata Arawai overseeing water standards to a much greater degree that used to sit within the Ministry of Health, and it wasn't implemented as effectively as it could have been. You've got the regional council, who will obviously monitor and be responsible for the environmental, the environmental standards, Taumata Arawai, the water standards and water regulatory, and then the ComCom for our economic regulation. And it will be in the mix of that will have an oversight of the CCO to make sure that we are that the CCO is operating to not only ensure efficiencies, to ensure it's as affordable as possible, but it's meeting the investment demand going forward. And that will come in unders and overs between the different participant councils. But that in itself presents the opportunity where with those three regulators a model can interface with those three regulators to look for innovation. And to your point about point source versus non-point source discharges, and to the next point on the slide about catchment-based approaches, thinking about how do we get best impact over time through different forms of investment. So that's sort of the brave new world we're entering into in the context of this decision. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, really well put. Dawn, oh, so hold on a minute. I had Lou. Lou, did you have a question?
Yeah, quickly, just a question. As I say, one of the things with the shareholding forum, okay, we had some discussion, some of it was actually on connections and others were on population. Is that correct? And that is something that I think has to be discussed, because I do think connections has a big, I'm also very, very keen to see a catchment base, and the fact that we look at the iwi and the local commitments we all have as Waipa, which is different to Tainui. The regional one only links to Tainui. We have very, very many links and agreements that we work with in our own council, in our own area, that is certainly outside Tainui. And I believe that we do need to have actually recognised in this discussion and have the fact, you know, that we have agreements with locally, we have certain waterways and things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, great point, Lou. Philip, before I hand back to Dawn, unless Dawn, you wanted to answer that, just.
I might just make a comment, if I may, with respect to shareholding. I guess it's how the shareholding is established is important, and you're right, there is a different basis across the two CCOs. However, I guess in terms of when we think of the so what, it comes back to those rights and responsibilities that flow from a shareholding component. And yes, there will be contingent sort of debt liability components that will be, I guess, based on percentages and the like with respect to shareholding. But when it comes to those critical functions in terms of a voice at the table, voting rights, how consensus or outcomes is achieved, that is quite separate in terms of that voice at the table. So just wanted to be very clear in terms of that.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. Philip.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, you mentioned about DIA, and we've got the options up there of, you know, the sub-regional or the Waikato one. So that would, DIA, that would give us more confidence or be able to give us a really good understanding on the infrastructure of each of those councils and what needs to be done, and you know, someone asked about auditing and what have you before. So there'd be pretty thorough check from DIA that would help give us some confidence as well, would it?
So DIA has gathered previously information from all councils across the country on their financials, etc. So they hold a data set, and they have some expectations about what level of future investment based on current information they hold about each council is. And they are going to use that as part of their process in September, once everyone provides their water services delivery plans. Because DIA effectively has to sign all of those plans off. The reason, and I guess Waikato Water Done Well model has proactively engaged with DIA to get assurance that it's more likely to satisfy DIA's requirements in September or thereabouts for the councils that are party to it. So yes, we've got more confidence that that'll be successful in September.
And that information would be available for other councils to look at it who potentially may partner up together.
I can't for definitely answer that question, whether DIA's made that available.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to touch on the service and growth, because I guess when we were sort of presented with the assessment late last year, one of the I guess the not quite a burning platform, but one of the high priorities was would a sub-regional CCO working with Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato be able to service the growth in the North Waipa area more effectively than another one, because you would be working with 2 tier 1 high growth councils. So we've had conversations, particularly, and it comes back very much to in terms of the land development opportunities and those who have signalled their wish to progress under fast track legislation in that vicinity, and therefore servicing through the sub-regional wastewater treatment plant. In those conversations, there's been a commitment to go back to those mechanisms that are in place between Hamilton and Waipa to have, and Waikato to have those conversations around the timing, the funding plan and the like that we don't have yet for that infrastructure. But where we've kind of landed is that recognising that if that servicing was within a single CCO, it would have less risk. There wouldn't have to be a conversation in terms of between 2 CCOs as to who's going to fund it. Are you going to provide the revenue at the time that the CCO builds it? So there is that. However, we do believe that there are appropriate mechanisms that could be put in place to manage those conversations. As I said earlier, in terms of both CCOs will be plan takers. We will have future-proof who are moving into an greater implementation focus now that we have the future-proof strategy and a number of priority areas for development, such that council will continue to be a voice at that table to talk about what are regional priorities, and then have influence through the shareholders forum to sort of determine what's an appropriate funding plan, infrastructure delivery plan to ensure that that growth is serviced at the appropriate time. So we believe that one is slightly lower risk, one might have greater level of complexity, but it's not a deal breaker for either. We both believe that that infrastructure, and to be fair, we're always going to have a boundary with someone somewhere in terms of these things. So how we work through those is ensuring that our CCO is set up and established, that it is delivering to the right priorities for our community. And equally, we know that government's incentive direction is very much around ensuring growth is provided for, such that we have appropriate housing stock, meet the housing challenges that New Zealand is facing.
Can I just ask one on that, what you're talking about? Do you actually believe, as I do, that the 2 CCOs should integrate at a later date? If they do, they need to be cooperative with each other and actually have similar systems, similar operating systems, so that they can actually integrate and work together much more collectively. I'm probably not explaining this very well, but what I'm saying is that when they're being developed, we should actually ensure that we always have that liaison between the 2 senior CCOs.
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely. I think that, as Waikato Water done well when it first started, where everybody was at the table, it was recognised that that was the ideal outcome for the region. And I think everybody still recognises that. But as me, Susan, spoke to, the challenges and complexity that some individual councils face just say that the journey and the pathway to get there, it means that we're going to be in a position of establishing 2. I think that already there is a strong commitment to understand that if one of those CCOs is going to make a significant investment in say a system or a process or something, that there would be a conversation in terms of how might that look in that longer term.
I might just add to that, Lou, and I see that Roger's got his hand up, but these ongoing conversations, I can assure you and to the listeners today that there are almost daily conversations at CE level, mayoral level, operational level about what that would look like. And we are actually wanting to almost formalise that now and start that conversation. If that's the decision after public consultation, that there are 2 CCO formed, what's the best pathway to transition to allow them to come together at an appropriate time in the future?
Yep.
And what are the key decisions and commitments to relationship and communication along that pathway, which I think is really healthy and a really constructive way of approaching this, given everybody's got tensions and need for speed or certainty or whatever it is. So I think it's a really positive outcome of the process to date, and can assure you, yeah, literally there are daily conversations about this. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, to use Mayor Paula's vernacular, she refers to it as making sure everybody's using the same Lego blocks. Yeah, very, very much appetite there to hold that ultimate merger, if that's the right term, in the back of our minds, and ensuring we've got clear pathways to that. Now, I've got Monty, just beat you, Roger, so I'll go Monty, then Roger.
Thanks, Susan. I just wanted to explore this idea of either CCO being a plan taker, which we hear quite a lot, and I get, but in real life, it might be a little different to that. Because if one of the reasons you're doing this is to chase the capital efficiency, part of that is about phasing capital development, right? You don't build 7 plants next year, you build 7 plants over the next 7 years. So you've got a nice pipeline of work for your civil construction community. You keep price inflation down, all that sort of stuff. So can someone tell me just in the, what's the thinking around how that might work? Because you've got all these councils who still want to, cater for their growth and renewals and so on. You've got a board running the CCO that's trying to optimise their capital efficiency, which is what we're setting it up for. And there's going to be a little bit of negotiation required. Is that expected to be one of the things that happens between the shareholders forum and the board, with this backwards and forwards of statement of expectations and strategic plan, or have we not really thought about that much yet? I don't think it's a huge problem, but I think it'd be nice to have some idea of what people are thinking there.
If I might make a start and then hand to Carl in terms of, I guess, real life water care experience, is that I think that conversation would be live at a number of levels. I think as we are developing up at officer level, we would have a good working relationship with our utilities in terms of understanding what is able to be achieved, because they are going to have the market insights as well. And we know that the civil contracting market is absolutely tapped out in terms of their ability to deliver. So I think, it's going to happen at all levels in terms of understanding that we may have to manage expectations in some areas, because the reality being is that as you say, there will be constraints on our ability to deliver.
I agree with Dawn. Experience in Auckland says that's a negotiation or an iterative process, and there's I think the process in Auckland has evolved over the 15 odd years that the Auckland Super City and Watercare and the other CCOs in Auckland have been in place on both sides, between the council and the CCOs, and now has probably got to the point where there are actual grown-up conversations about what those issues are and what that might mean. In your example of, we're going to upgrade, we've got a plan to upgrade these 7 wastewater treatment plants over this period of time, because that's the most capital efficient way of doing it. We can bring that one forward, but that means X in terms of how much customers might have to pay in addition to make that happen, for example. Those sort of conversations happen as part of setting a statement of an intent in Auckland's case, or a statement of expectation going forward, so that everyone's informed about the implications of those decisions, and then things happen.
I might add to that, Monty, I think, because to your question, so that it happens at a number of levels. When the mayors go into the shareholders forum, they take very clearly what their expectations are from their individual councils and have that discussion at the shareholder forum. Some of those will be collective, like the vision and strategy for the Waikato River to Turi Whaimana. How are we going to give effect to that through the CCO? But each council will bring their respective district plans. For example, for us, it's the Ahuaki spatial plan as well. bring that to the table. And as you form your statement of expectation to the board chair, the board and the CE, those go through in the statement of expectation that we want our plans for our placemaking in our respective places to be given effect to. And here are some of our timelines and key growth areas or development challenges. And that will be a conversation of reconciliation constantly, I would imagine, between the board of the CCO and the shareholder forum, aka the mayors, but also the relationship between the board itself and the CE and the conversations they will have directly with each council on a, I would say, quarterly basis at a minimum, and reconciling. And of course, we've got future proof, for example, for the Waipa, Waikato, Hamilton City Council and Matamata Piako councils. We've got that future proof design, and that will form, I would expect, a really important part of any conversation with a CCO. So the plans, when we talk about regional plans, district plans, spatial plans, will form very much an overarching guidance to the CCO to deliver to. And there will be some unders and overs and some negotiations about sequencing, timing, and importance to each community. And that will come down to, as we've heard from many people who have been through this, all about relationship, all about building trust and confidence, and all about good communication about expectations. So I think it's a really good question you ask, and it's an important one.
Yeah, and I mean, those are good answers. And the water care example, I mean, it's a really good example, but it is only one council. So it is going to be a little bit more complex. And I hear you, it's all going to be about relationships, and it will come out in the wash. And over time, it won't be a problem, but just there will be times where it is a problem. And it potentially goes to the way the shareholder forum is working, because the two models are slightly different with the voting rights. One being you're a member, therefore your vote is equal. Another being your shareholding, i.e. your number of connections. And yeah, you can foresee potential friction points in that forum. And yeah, it'll require ongoing collaborative mayors working for the good of the whole CCO, which I hope will happen. And it's just final question on this, Carl. In the particularly the Waikato Water, or not either, in the capital works programs that you saw bolted together, did you see phasing problems in that sort of 10-year horizon, or did it kind of look like it was workable?
Not specifically. The additional capex that's been added into the sub-regional CCO is phased in the later half of the decade. Probably, well, not with direct consideration of deliverability, to be fair, probably because it's too early in the process, because those projects were envisaged to be in the second decade when they did their capital budget planning. So that's a refinement that would happen later. It's probably on the margins in terms of any financial impact and uncertainty around forecasting growth and demand anyway, to be fair. So no significant issues were obvious.
Roger, just had to go and blame
Yeah, thank you. I am going to have to leave in just a couple of minutes, but I put my hand up to support Dawn in her comment about the cross-boundary consideration for growth at North Waipa. I think that's manageable under either CCO option, so that didn't concern me. But I did want to talk about the concern that I expressed in terms of the level of servicing growth. I just, in considering the two, was it 65% of the capital in the sub-regional model was growth related, and a far lesser proportion in the Waikato model of 177 million. I was just wondering whether there's an opportunity to go and get that growth allocation assessed if we were to go with the Waikato Waters model, because I'm just a little bit concerned that there's not the capacity to support Waipa as being the only tier 1 growth entity within the Waikato model.
So the only comment I make, I guess, is that the 177 million that's in the Waikato Water Done Well column in the table is or includes all of Waipa's growth investment that's in the LTP. And most of that 177 million, I don't have the number right in front of me, apologies, but most of that 177 million is a significant component of that 177.
But again, that was a moderated LTP that we finally finished up with, wasn't it?
So and the 2.2 that's in the sub-regional includes all of Waipa's growth investment as well, but obviously includes substantial growth investment in the broader Hamilton Waikato district areas.
Okay. So, thank you.
Can I just, Roger, can I just ask you, sorry, when you say you're worried that there's not the capacity, what form of capacity are you asking about?
Well, if we looked at all of the discussions on Three Waters going back to when it first came in the last government, there was indication that across the whole country, there was considerable investment required to bring our waters up to the desired level of infrastructure. Now, when we constructed our LTP this time, we had to go through with a fine-tooth comb, and there was a lot of projects that were actually deleted from our LTP. So I'm wondering whether, in considering our LTP as our needs going forward, we're actually reflecting what is actually needed in reality in terms of the level of investment. And I'm just wondering whether, if you look at the sub-regional model, whether they've actually, in terms of Hamilton City and Waikato, they've assessed theirs under a different lens to what we have. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, that's right. Thank you for helping me. So it's capacity in terms of financial capacity to deliver. It's also, have we included everything in our work program? And I suspect in behind that question, you're also saying, can we actually deliver it as well? Because I think in every LTP, you're looking at actually what you can actually deliver on the ground. So am I hearing you right? Can I just affirm that those are the concerns you have?
The concern, yeah, is that
Okay.
you've stated that it's our current LTP that's been included in the financials.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes, that's what all councils are working to at the request of the DIA. Yep.
Yeah, and I just am concerned that we had trimmed back our, oh, look, there's my wife in the car going, look, I'm going to have to go, sorry.
Okay. So,
Okay.
Roger, just because I'm going to answer the question, we'll let you know. But just because there will be other people listening to that, I think Roger raises a really good point. And if you don't understand the ins and outs of local government, you know, this is all a bit like a spaghetti diagram. But I'd just say for the record, and Claire, you're the Chair of Service Delivery, that LTPs get audited by Office of the Auditor General. You have to prove that your work program is appropriate. You have to approve that you can fund it, you can actually execute it, and then we get audited on our delivery over time. So that's the first point. So your LTPs should be rigorously and robustly tested in terms of their appropriateness, not only for every 10 years, but every 3 years, and in fact, every year. What the point of the CCO or the Local Waters Done Well model is looking to resolve, one of the things it's looking to resolve is this fact that with our debt headroom limits and our affordability challenges, that yes, councils weren't potentially looking at doing everything they possibly could over a 10-year period, and there were constraints we had. And the impetus to change the model was to allow for greater certainty, a greater fullness of planning of infrastructure across district councils and city councils across New Zealand. So the fact that the debt headroom ceiling for a CCO is higher than it is for a council, and the fact that the DIA, the Office of the Auditor General, and the CCOs themselves will be looking under the new economic regulatory framework, the whole regulatory framework going forward, will mean that there will be significant scrutiny on the investment plans and the investment framework going forward of each CCO, and whether these LTPs do encompass everything that's required over time will be the subject of great analysis year on year, I suspect, moving into this new framework. So just trying to outline why the change is happening, and that Roger's question plays to that, I think, very strongly. And but I think that there can be confidence that in terms of the best information at this point in time, the LTPs where that information is held in terms of local government.
Mike.
Yeah, Roger's gone, so I'm just trying to pick up a little bit what you were saying there. So I understand all that, Steph. Thanks for that. I guess is what he's saying is, if the 500% was sitting there for waters as a standalone when we did our LTP, was there anything deferred that we would have put in there?
And so I'll look to Dawn and Claire, because they'll have been providing oversight of the infrastructure strategy and that forward investment program.
Thank you. I'm trying to think. Certainly there were growth areas that were removed in terms of fairly early on in the development of the long-term plan. So in looking at those, it would be a matter in terms of what was the investment in waters to support those growth sales versus investment in other infrastructure, and the constraint the council will still find itself under. So certainly there were some growth sale areas, and Carter's Flat's one that comes to mind. I think, yeah, there was a growth sale here in Te Awamutu. So there were. We are also still working with Regional Council around our comprehensive stormwater discharge consent. So there is still some unknowns in terms of sitting in there, in terms of expectations for investment in infrastructure to meet the conditions of those consent. And so because that was an evolving thing, we didn't have certainty, is that we've probably taken a more constrained view in terms of that required investment. But across more broadly, early years of the LTP, we weren't able to afford all of our renewals commitments. So we've taken some risk in terms of those things, but it's balanced by greater investment in the later years of the long-term plan to reverse that.
So I guess someone asked, I think Claire or Mike asked before, hey, is there still debt ceiling room? And I think the answer was yes, if there's other things to add in, so that's fine. And I guess the other thing is, all it might affect is the 4.6% average over, year on year, might not be, probably it's not going to be totally accurate. Would that be fair? All right.
Dawn, just a clarification. You just started talking about compliance with the new stormwater consent. Stormwater CapEx is not part of this, right? It's because it's not going to the CCO. Stormwater CapEx is staying in-house, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. Those costs will come back to council as a contracted service, but it will impact, I guess, in terms of the CCO, because they will be delivering on our behalf. So their capacity to deliver, but you're right, the financial will come back to council.
Yeah, but Roger was particularly talking about growth CapEx and whether we covered it. And just a couple of points on that. When we did start running into debt headroom problems, we did pull some growth cell development out. But we are still making the requirement of 20% above the high growth forecast for available land for residential purposes. I believe I've seen reports sometime recently that confirms we are making that. So to Roger's point, we are still making that, which means we are still catering for growth. And I think Carl's point is a really good one, that in the Waikato Waters Done Well model, the debt headroom is the same as the CapEx program over the 10-year period. So there's massive capacity to ramp it up in response to growth if it went above forecast anyway. So I think that's quite an important sort of buffer should it need to be used.
I think Councillor Gordon, he also made reference to the New Zealand perspective, in terms of the prior Three Waters reform being signalled as a requirement, $180 billion or something in terms of that deficit. And I remember reading recently in terms of that, all councils have kind of recognised that and have invested through their LTP to start to address those deficits. So we are seeing investment in the waters ramping up significantly, but just being very aware that also puts those constraints on the supply chain who cannot just turn around and immediately deliver. So we've got to be very cognizant of that and how we ensure that those projects are delivered.
Lo.
Yes. Yeah, I totally concur. One of the things that just intrigues me at the moment, we are looking at quite disparate operations and the actual implementation or setting up costs. Have we actually analysed the two operations and how much it's going to cost to actually implement the infrastructures for each one of them? Because we're dealing with one with 7 councils, the other we're dealing with 3 or 2 or 3, and what would the cost structures be? And does the government look like it's going to help fund, or is there any funding for this? Or is this going to be integral debt that goes into each of those operations?
So the answers to your, is there government funding question, I think they've said there isn't. So that's probably a tongue-in-cheek question. So that's the working assumption. So therefore it is for both models, they've assumed that it is part of the starting debt of the CCO. That's consistent. Both models have allowed for those setup or establishment costs within their financial models. They have made some estimates of what those numbers are. They're broadly consistent in terms of quantum, in the order of 10 million establishment cost. It depends on the exact timing of when entities transition into the Waikato water model as to what's counted as establishment costs or transition costs, but it's broadly consistent. The level of rigor around those numbers is also probably consistently not that high, because neither entity has got to the point where it's got a full transition plan and understanding of all of the work required over what time frame. So it's consistent in terms of it's an assessment, an assumption in the model.
Bill and then Claire.
Thanks, Susan. Can you tell me, is there a disputes resolution process in either of these record of agreement or heads of agreement? And is it anticipated that there would be? And I'm just looking at those questions that were asked earlier about, different shareholding models on the board, and, the way in which decisions are made. You can have consensus decision making, or you can have shareholding decision making with the votes being cast and that sort of thing. So I'm guessing that those sort of things exist inside your heads of agreement or records of agreement. And I just I hadn't seen it anywhere. I was interested.
Steph might be able to clarify this statement that I'm about to make. But my understanding is the actual workings of the detail of how those shareholders forums are going to work in practice is reasonably high level at the moment. Like, there isn't a formal set of governance documents prepared for either of the forums. You're right, the voting or the decision-making approach for each of the forums is slightly different. Certainly the sub-regional one is focused on consensus decision-making in the record of agreement. But ultimately there are voting mechanisms also outlined in the record of agreement where each council has 1 vote each. So 3 councils, there would be 3 votes. Arguably it might be 2-1, but the objective is to get consensus. In the Waikato water model, it is votes based on shareholding percentage, which is based on a number of connections. And there are there are thresholds whereby a certain number of votes must be cast to make that carry. In some instances, it's 75% of voting. So effectively, you're again targeting consensus in a slightly different articulation of that, but the detail will need to be developed.
Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, and just following on from that, because I wanted to talk a little bit more about that influence and the questions that Monty was raising about priorities and things like that. So we also know that there's the Bill number 3 before the House, which also is setting out expectations around the influence of whether it's the shareholders forum, the individual councils setting their, I think, is it letter of expectations or statement of expectations, and then what the board's going to do, because the board in the end is the one that's running the CCO. And I just wanted to sort of draw on what LGNZ's submission is to the Bill number 3, because it actually highlights that there's more oversight and control proposed for the shareholders of the water organisations than was expected, like under the standard CCO model. And this risks political interference or influence in operational matters. So they're highlighting that we should be very careful in, well, I suppose it's a new structure, okay? We've got to understand how the different moving parts are going to work together, because they're saying that, yes, there's a desire for councils to I have a say on the priorities and the strategic direction, but we are working within a regulated environment now. We're also going to have water services strategies that have to have annual reporting and shareholder performance monitoring as well. And so I don't want us to be trying to make a decision on which model to go with, thinking that one of the shareholder forum and shareholder proposals is actually going to give us more influence than the other. That's all. I mean, it's a broader picture. And I think we've got to accept that any CCO is actually going to create a bit more distance between what council wants to do and what actually happens. But we've just got to be confident that the structures that we've got there, we're going to have a good say. We're going to have friends around the table as well. We're all, working positively together, and trust that the legislation is going to be enabling. I mean, I think that the points were really well made. And I think that when we come to the section today where we're talking about our submission, that we need to be very clear on which side of the fence we want to be on in terms of how much influence. So, yeah.
Excellently put, Claire, and something that, did sort of stick in my mind a little. So I'm just conscious of time too. So if we can just sort of keep progressing through, that would be helpful.
If we start to sort of turn our minds to the balancing of information and what we know and what we understand, the analysis we've been able to take, is if these things are considered the highest priority components, then the sub-regional CCO provides these. So it's very much that focus on the management of growth, smaller number of partner councils, and a metro council participation and alongside those high growth councils. So they what we consider be the strengths of the sub-regional CCO. When we look to Waikato Water done well, it does have a lower annual cost increase for consumers. The opportunity for Waipa's position. We are a rural provincial council, albeit with metro challenges. In terms of progressing the work that and the conversations that are underway around the catchment consenting initiatives, and aligning, as I say, with a number of other rural and provincial councils, then Waikato Water done well has those strengths. I've already spoken in terms of those strategic assessments, in terms of the those outcomes and the handout. I know these are other points that have been raised in terms of considerations that, turning our minds to as we look to the decision report at the end of the month, in terms of which CCO model provides that opportunity for Waipa to maybe more of an influence there in that space, be a part of that regional leadership, understanding that it has, this decision does not happen in isolation, I guess, in terms of there's a lot of other conversations going on across the region, government initiatives and the like that also need to be considered. And just coming back, I suppose, in terms of these fundamentally, and I'm stealing words from Mr. Topman, in the sub-regional CCO, we are bound with Waikato District and Hamilton City under the National Policy Statement for Urban Development as part of Metro Hamilton. So we're a Tier 1 territorial authority with to a number of obligations to provide for growth in a proactive manner. For Waikato Water Done Well, we're both a rural and urban district council. Cambridge and Te Awamutu are live, work and play service centres that are separate entities to Hamilton. We have strong economic and social ties to the rural hinterland to the south and east of our district. So that was a bit of a summary in terms of who we are, which is part of that consideration in this matter as well. So I was just going to hand over to Lisa in terms of just to take us through our consultation expectations if there are no other questions.
Any final questions? I imagine we can dash back to you anyway, Dawn, but before we launch into consultation discussions? No? Okay, floor is yours then, Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. As has recently been referred to in this meeting, this is most definitely the most significant decision that this council will ever make, and probably the most significant that local government has made since the amalgamations in 1989. As part of that, the government has approved some legislation that is aimed at streamlining the consultation process. So it's a little bit different to what we do under the Local Government Act for the long-term plan. We must consult on an anticipated or proposed model for delivering water services, but we're not required to consult on the draft or final water services delivery plan. The legislation's about ensuring that councils are only required to consult once, and that applies despite anything that may be contrary in our significance and engagement policy. So as you'll be aware, that's the policy that we kind of benchmark our consultation on. There are some defined criteria that need to be met that we've been working through, and with the Amendment Bill 3 yet to be adopted, we're working closely with Simpson Grierson to ensure that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and that the consultation document will be legally reviewed prior to adoption to ensure that it meets all requirements. The team are currently developing up the consultation approach, which I'm hoping to be in a position to share with you all at the end of next week.
Marcus.
A quick question, Lisa, for the consultation. I realise this is for everybody to watch live. I noticed that we've got acronyms creeping in without explanations, and I'm just wondering if it'd be quite good to, PAA, CCO, LTP, what those actually are.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Is it alphabet soup?
Yeah.
kind of local government,
Yeah.
right? Excellent.
I should say the memo is online for anybody who would like to see what sits behind this slide as well as all the other information that's been shared today.
Awesome stuff. Philip.
Yep. Morning, Lisa. Just briefly, part of the consultation you said will be available next week. Will you be looking at doing drop-in sessions?
Absolutely. So the approach that we're taking is that given the significance of the decision, we're proposing that we do a letterbox drop to all Waipa addresses, as well as ensuring that our out-of-town ratepayers also get sent information. We will be focusing on attending events where people already are, kind of like a captive audience, so to speak, but also having drop-in sessions at council offices and the libraries, and some drop-in kind of pop-ups in the main street of the main towns as well, and also making sure that we reach our rural residents. Although they're not connected to our water supply, it does affect them in terms of stormwater. So making sure that they're fully aware of the implications for them as well.
Some areas are on water supply as well. Some rural areas are, but and what about the Chamber of Commerce and things like that as well?
They are our key partners as part of this process. So yes, yeah, there will be meetings held with similar to what we did with the enhanced annual plan. So we had some chamber only sessions for the business community, and then we also had meetings that our community groups such as Grey Power, Rotary, Lions were invited to hear the detail that sits behind both the options.
Any other questions for Lisa in respect of consultation? Oh, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Back to you, Dawn.
Thank you. So just to wrap up, so as I say, this will lead through to a decision report at the council meeting on the 26th of February. And then working with Lisa in terms of her working her magic for our consultation documentation, and then going out and doing that public consultation alongside the long-term plan. And there it is. And from there through to, as I alluded to earlier, in terms of lodging our water services delivery plan, the WDSP. So yeah, I think that is us. Lovely.
Well, thanks, Dawn, Carl and Lisa. Look, before you leave, I just want to see if there are any final questions for any of these officers in respect of this body of work. Bruce.
Sorry for this late one. Under the, if we went to the Waikato model, 4 of the 7 councils are water compliant with meters. Is there something being worked through about balancing that in costs for, I know the other 3 are going to do it in the future. And then, that's the 4 that they've invested a fair bit of money in it. So just, that's where I'm coming from.
So the answer to your question about balancing is no. The rationale for that is that the balancing is gets reasonably complicated reasonably quickly, because ultimately each individual entity is bringing some starting revenue, some starting debt, and then a forecast capital program, which for the ones that are planning meters will include meters. And then that generates a closing debt capacity at the end, which all goes to the future cost to customers. So you sort of have to look at that pie altogether, and not just pick one slice and critique the ones that don't have very much in that slice, because they might be bringing low current debt, but then have a higher per capita debt, CapEx requirement to implement meters, for example. So you need to look at all those things together. And the ethos of both of the CCO options is that everyone should bring their best foot to the table and participate on a collaborative basis. So we haven't gone down that path.
Yeah, good question, Bruce. Good to get clarity on. Claire.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciated all the information that's been presented today. So with the Waikato water model, my understanding is that Waipa would be one of the larger councils that's involved. In fact, if we didn't participate in that model, there might be a risk that the remaining councils might not be able to form a large enough entity or an entity with enough gravitas and scale to actually effectively, meet the requirements that the government's pointing out. So that's sort of tied up in that leadership role, isn't it? I just wanted to sort of remind people that, if we're thinking about, that broader Waikato region, I mean, there's something in this decision that's a bit more than simply which way we should go, because it does affect the other councils involved as well. Yeah, you might be able to speak to that, Susan.
Yeah, Claire, it's really eloquently put. I guess we can't underestimate the impact, I suppose, of the way that we go. And it's not just, it would be really short-sighted of us just to consider the now and just Waipa. I think, I mean, this government has made no secret of the fact it wants to see strong collaborative regional leadership, doesn't have an appetite to have 68 different relationships with 68 different districts or councils. So I think here's an opportunity for us to be able to show that we can act collaboratively, whether it's a larger scale geographically with the Waikato Water Done Well model, or even on a smaller model with our parts to the north. Certainly, the Waikato Water Done Well model is unique in that my understanding is that this is the single largest collaboration by number of councils in this space in respect of waters reform. So that in itself is pretty impressive and speaks to the complexity, but also the level of goodwill and cooperation that sits in the Waikato region, and playing the long game, thinking strategically and understanding the need for that regional leadership. So yes, it's not just about the numbers and just about business cases and just about modelling. There are other relationship, strong leadership elements in play that should feature into our thinking to a degree. Absolutely. So, and thank you for raising that. So look, I think we've covered everything that we need to. But look, before I ask these kind people to depart, I'm really keen for us to have just a whip round the table, and if you would be so kind as to share your thinking with everybody present, because I think it's really important that certainly the purpose behind that would be to enable staff to get a bit of a steer on people's thinking around their warmth to either of the models, so that they can then prepare the paper for the 26th of February. So I'm going to start to my left, as I often do, which most people might say is interesting. But so Monty, can I invite you to share your thinking with us?
Okay. For me, the Waikato Waters Done Well is the preferable option. I think it positions Waipa in the region as a leader in this space. It helps get that CCO off the ground with a view that will likely then end up with two similarly sized CCOs in the Waikato, the city one basically and the rest. And I think, if you believe in the capital efficiencies and the cost efficiencies that are achievable by these amalgamations, you probably want to carry on through to the ultimate conclusion of one waters entity for the whole of the region. And I think that the two CCO model probably facilitates that. The other huge advantage for me of that is it enables the catchment-based approach to this whole water space, which I think has got some real merits also in addition to the sort of the capital and cost efficiencies you're chasing. So that's me. Just one question from me. Are we looking for a staff recommendation when we come back to the next meeting, the decision meeting? My preference is probably yes. I really, really like hearing from experts. And so the people who have sat down and really, really worked with this, a recommendation and the reasons behind it I always find useful. Doesn't mean I'd always go with it, but I think it's a really good starting point for debate.
Yeah, thanks for that, Monty. Can I just jump straight to Dale-Marie, because she needs to sneak off. So Dale-Marie,
apologies,
thinking,
everybody.
please.
I've just got to pop over to Vale Court shortly. My thoughts on this is, I think it was Steph or maybe Susan that just said it. It's like spaghetti junction right now for me and the last kid on the block. And I'm probably going to lean more on people like Bill, who've been around this table a lot longer, as well as acknowledging that between all of this, I haven't had a chance to talk to a lot of the iwi and how they're feeling around that sort of stuff, and getting an update from Steph this morning, because her and Susan sit in some of those forums. But for me, honestly, I know there's only one of me, so I'll be guided with the rest of yous around the table. I just want to make sure that our people are looked after in amongst all this. I've got grave concerns about this, and everybody heard about it. And my thoughts around how central government are moving towards this, and the water will still suffer for a long time before we get our A into G and get something sorted. So kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Tamari. Claire.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I'm leaning in favour of the Waikato water model myself. What really appeals to me is working with similar sized and similar culture organisations. Nothing against the city and Waikato District Council, but I feel that, you know, our size and nature of our communities is closer to those, and to me it just makes sense to work with them. I also appreciate the lower cost increases that are forecast, because I think affordability is really important. And the other thing I love about that model is they've said they're going to prioritise that catchment approach, which I think makes so much sense. I'd love it if that could be achieved. Yeah, so yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
Thanks, Claire. Mike, any of your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, also, yeah, hey, I support the Waikato Water Done Well CCO over the sub-regional. Some of the reasons are, hey, at the moment, the figures are the figures, and I'm sure they'll be tweaked over time, but I'm looking at ratepayers, you know, when they turn on the tap, when they flush the toilet each year, a 10.2% increase is going to be harder to swallow than a 4.6% increase. So that's the first thing. The finances are definitely part of us. I do like the overall, there is less debt borrowing in the Waikato Water Done Well scenario from the get-go. And again, I can see how these figures are going to change. As Clee's mentioned, the catchment approach really sits well with me. It's just it's gonna affect a greater area, more whenua, and more rivers and tributaries, really. I think that approach is going to be sound. Look, both options, I think, have advantages and disadvantages. But I do think we've got more alignment with the rural provincial councils. You know, we've got a lot of similar sized towns. You know, I've listed them all here, but I won't go there. But there's just more similarity. Just feel more comfortable with like-minded people, and the rural. You know, there's a lot more rural folks involved in the Waikato Water Done Well. I also, as Claire's put up previously, that's 2% of average household income, which I think is around 121,000 versus 2.5. It doesn't sound much, but when you convert it into dollars, it actually is. So again, that's another advantage for Waipa, but also those councils in that CCO. My concern is councils coming online over 3 years in this model of preference. And hey, I'd like at that mayoral levels, CEO level, you know, if we can do a bit more work there, at least with some of them, to bring them into tranche one would be really advantageous. Fundamentally, that te mana o te wai, te mana o te tangata, healthy water, healthy people, sits well with me. It sort of sets the foundation for a CCO, and it's well anchored in terms of a strategic direction and plan. And that's going to be backed up by, you know, good focus, but it's going to be outcomes and results driven, and that's what the accountability is going to be there for. And that's, you know, is it the Commerce Commission, I think, sitting over that, which I think is really great as well. But yeah, I really like that vision, I guess, vision statement. It's a really good starting point. Yeah, no, did it. Look, I think everything else has sort of been mentioned there. Yeah, I did have a question, but it was a keen question. Can I ask a question? Is it too late? Otherwise, all right.
No, go for it.
All right.
It's not a really long one.
No, it isn't. It's really just in Parliament, I think they call it a Patsy question. It's around the money that we would shift to a CCO, Ken. Let's just say 180, 190 million dollars. That we have to guarantor that money and just explain to, I guess, council, but people looking at just how that sits in terms of our debt ceiling, capacity to borrow, etc., whether it's inside or outside of CCO. And that's me done. Thank you.
Yeah, so look, in terms of in terms of that, the like if we continue to borrow from the LGFA, there is a requirement that the councils need to guarantee in some way. That does not affect the council's headroom. So once that debt goes off to the CCO and whatever CCO debt is incurred that councils need to guarantee, it doesn't affect the residual council's headroom. I have spoken to the LGFA on that matter, and they have confirmed that.
All right, thank you very much. And as others have mentioned, or probably mentioned, I think the message is clear that down the track, and we're not talking decades down the track, in the medium term down the track, we want to work towards a single CCO, which I think was it is the vision of the previous government, but I'm sure this government also, that actually less is more when it makes sense. And in this catchment, it makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. Bill, your reflections.
Sorry. Made a couple of notes in my trusty little notebook here. The first one was the images, Dawn. I noticed one was a Granny Smith and one was a Red Delicious. I think it was a Red Delicious. And that feels like the decisions we're trying to make here today. Is one not so good to eat straight away, but better when you cook it. And the Red Delicious you can eat, and maybe not so good when you cook it. Anyway, imagery, it goes a long way with me in terms of putting things forward like that. And I just feel that the sub-regional is transitional to me, and do it right first time.
Thanks, Bill. The chef, Bill. Joe, did you want to share your reflections with us?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you as always for having community boards here. Super valuable for us to be part of the process. We will give our feedback through that public consultation period. But I just want to say I've been really encouraged with all your discussions and questions over the last 2 workshops. And it really seems like, although the goal is collaboration with the Waikato, it really seems like the residents of Waipa are really strongly in mind. So that's been really reassuring for me. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. That means a lot. Lou, ready for your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm as I say, I'm very, very much aware of the situation, and I do agree with Bill with one thing. I believe this operation we're doing now is transitional. Totally right, Bill. This is just the start of something that we will move on over time. The big thing is we already work with civil defence, okay, with Otahonga and Waitomo. And we found that works very well. So we do know that our partners actually cooperate and work very, very easily with us. And we link in with a lot of very similar values and needs. My belief is that we need at this stage to retain the fact that we need a complete picture of us, a strategic picture that in the future, what we're doing with Waikato Water's done well will serve us as a better starting model. And we will not have a situation where some of the councils possibly will move into another area outside of our control. And I think that's critical, that we encompass them now and we bring them in so that we can create the transitional plan that we need in the future.
Thanks, Lou. Philip, what are you thinking?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, Lou just touched on a good point there. We've got some really good, strong relationships with our regional councils, and I've been tendering towards the Waikato Water. I think there could be more complexities with the sub-regional, but I'm heading towards the Waikato. So thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for that. Marcus.
Yep. Yeah, nothing really new to add apart from what's been around the table. The Waikato Water's done well. It just feels like the right thing to go. Question for Ken though, now that he's here. I've had a couple of people ask, like, when we make this transition, what does that mean for us as a council and future projects? Does it mean that things like Te Arawai and stuff are back on the books and stuff like that, or what happens there?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah, look, I mean, markets, they would have to be subject to further consideration. I mean, what we have done in our high-level financial modelling is to look at what residual council looks like and make sure that the metrics look okay in that space. But look, that analysis is based on what was in the what's in our current draft LTP. So we haven't looked at those metrics, bringing those projects back in. I mean, that needs to be a future decision to be made. Yeah.
Liz. Thanks everyone for the thoughts so far. This has been an interesting process for sure. Look, there's disadvantages, advantages, I guess, for both models. I took a little bit of heart from, I think the message was delivered via David Topman actually, that we can really go either way with this. We are urban and we are rural, so we have choices. My natural inclination initially was that I've always found, I guess, we've always worked very closely with the city. And it's simply because of our boundary and the importance of our boundary with our growth. But when you look at the numbers, the debt headroom, the capacity for growth, it's actually looking really attractive for our Waikato option. And we do have shared services already with many of our partners in the Waikato. So, this isn't going to be new relationships. This is probably just gathering them a lot closer than perhaps what we ever have before. I do, I guess, want to encourage those other Waikato councils to come on board earlier. I think that there is a small risk here and a perception risk if we're only working with a couple. I would love to see us all band together right from the 1st of July 2026. I think that would look better from a perception, and I guess the comms that we have around that will be really important. The bigger step, the bigger goal is the bigger CCO for the full Waikato one. That's really, really important. And I think we need to get that message, and I'm really encouraged actually by Steph's thoughts earlier that we will start now that process to ensure that we are working towards that bigger goal from the outset. And I think that, or never forgetting that and just having that as an end goal is really, really important. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Bruce.
I condone exactly what Liz just said. I think I'm for a Waikato model. I think there's more advantages than that, but I think long term, whatever that figure may be, we'll all be together in one big one, but we've got to start somewhere.
Thank you, Bruce. Look, I think for all the reasons that you've all collectively shared, I certainly favour the Waikato Water Done Well model. I think actually Mike Pettit probably expressed in greater, more succinctly the compelling reasons for me, but I do think it's really important, as Claire sort of alluded to earlier, that don't underestimate the importance of regional leadership and our ability to look at long-term goals beyond our boundaries, think boundaryless, and think in a manner that provides the best infrastructure outcomes well into the future. At times, local government, I guess, is criticised for pretty short-term thinking, and now's our time to dispel that criticism. So I'm really encouraged by all of the deep thinking and the reflection and the challenging of people's perhaps preconceived ideas coming into this, and really pleased to see that we've not only got a really thorough paper in front of us and well teased out objectives matched up to both options, but there's also been a lot of really good thinking going around this elected members table today. So I really thank you all for that. So I think with that said, that's provided a pretty clear steer to staff around our thinking at this point in time, which should enable you to move forward with that paper for the 26th of February. Okay, Mike Pettit, final word, not about dogs, please.
No, look, and just on Councillor Gower's point, I don't want to stifle him because that would be draconian, but I do wish to muffle his comment. And it's really off the back of some conversations I think we had last year that what we do not, from my point of view, what we do not want to do is we've got this new debt headroom. The ratepayer don't give a rat's ass. The ratepayer is just, what are my bills for water and rates? Now, if we go fill up our debt headroom, our rates bill for them is going to be more and more and more, and the water is still coming. So we just have to be aware that because there's more debt headroom, we just don't go and fill it. Yeah.
Totally agree. Just because you have it doesn't mean you should use it. Absolutely. Financial prudence is the future for sure. So look, there being no further discussion to be had, can I suggest we have a short break, because it's been a pretty intense hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, I can't even count. And we shall return for our next item, which is a bit more water, because of course we haven't had enough, about Bill 3. So let's return at past. Thanks. Right, let's just kick off again. My apologies for late resumption of this workshop, but ablutions and so forth needed a little bit of time. So can I now pass over to staff again, same ones, plus a David Topman, to step us through this current Bill 3 discussion.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, this piece of legislation, as I spoke to in the last item, landed just before Christmas. So staff have been working hard in terms of reading through it, getting to understand it, but also working with other groups such as Tautua Rā and Waikato Water Done Well, participating councils, in terms of starting to both understand it, but equally turn our minds to a submission. So I'm cognizant there are a lot of slides to work through, but it's really to make sure, I suppose, that we're all on the an understanding in terms of the requirements around the bill, but I'm also cognizant that we've provided you with a memo that provides a bit of an outline in terms of the purpose of the bill, what it's trying to achieve, what the key points are and the like. So I will whip through these pretty quickly, but ultimately moving through to submission points in terms of if there are any other points, I suppose, other than those that we've identified that you might like to ensure are covered in a submission. So yeah, just a reminder in terms of Bill 3 that the preceding two, the first one was the repeal of the Three Waters legislation, which removed the entities and the so forth that we were working towards previously. And then the first, or the Bill 2 as it was, which was talking about the Preliminary Arrangements Act. So that was the item that we referenced in the previous conversation, started to talk about how we might consult on our water entity options. So yes, so as I say, this is Bill 3. So arrived just before Christmas, as often happens, it closes on the 23rd of February. So we haven't got an ability to bring that submission back to you. So just a reminder that we will be submitting it under the delegation that we have in place for our Chief Executive to do so. But the decision in terms of that report back, it won't be to the SPMP. In fact, we're able to bring it back to the council meeting on the 26th of February. So in that meeting, there will be an omnibus of the various submissions that have happened over this period. So it will in fact be a little bit earlier in that report. So working through I guess a bit of a glossary and very aware in terms of our ability to move to acronyms very quickly. So that's very clear in terms of water services providers versus water services organisations. So this is to cover all options available to either councils or CCOs who are delivering water services. So water services providers is everybody. Some councils may choose to keep it as an in-house business unit to deliver that service. They will be a water service provider. But those people who move to a separate, like a CCO environment, as we are contemplating, is they will become water services organisations. So just a bit of a glossary as we work through this. So in terms of all water services providers, they are required to meet all of those statutory and legislative requirements that are sitting within the bill. And the key one there in terms of restrictions against privatisation. So that's something that's quite fundamental and foundational in terms of how we will manage water services into the future, that it will always be a public utility function. For water services organisations, so here's that distinction in terms of being a separately managed council, a limited liability company. The board appointments, so there's a very strong indication within that, or outline and requirement within the legislation as to how those board appointments are made, who deems them and who cannot sit on them. So just to be very clear in terms of that level of independence. They may not venture outside of their remit, and as I say, only councils or consumer trusts can be shareholders. So it's very much about that ownership and responsibility and link to delivering a water service. And there is an outline in terms of transfer agreement requirements. So this is the date of operation of the CCO in terms of how and what transfers from the home council into that organisation. So the bill itself, it is broken up into those three areas. working through each of those, the water services delivery systems. So this section talks about very much in terms of those components, and we spoke previously in terms of those reporting requirements, in terms of annual quarterly reports back through to shareholders and the like. So that's covered under this section. So this is where, and I know it's been raised certainly in the local government New Zealand sort of submission, which I think we should also sort of consider endorsing, is the term responsibility in terms of transfer of responsibility, and just being far more deliberate and explicit in terms of that, because I think if we're unclear in that space, that's where confusion, duplication, and that inability to achieve some of those efficiency gains will be met. But equally, there are some quite clear objectives and obligations within the legislation. I myself was very heartened to see to be a good employer. So we've highlighted that one because I think for all of our staff across all of our councils, that one is quite fundamental. These people work very hard within a council environment, and we want to be seen as transferring them to an environment of equally being well supported to deliver great services for our community. The financial principles, and these were signalled quite early in terms of requirements that we need to feed through into our water services delivery plans. And it's giving absolute guidance in terms of the Commerce Commission as to what they will need to and be required to have oversight of once both water services, but all water services providers are in operation. And from our perspective, very much were used and understood in terms of when we made the decision looking all of the possible options ahead for Waipa, and why we deemed a CCO environment was the most appropriate pathway for Waipa for future delivery of service. Under operational matters, it talks and speaks to that setting of charges, debt collection powers. So at the moment, council has special powers under the LGA in terms of it, but this will return it to a much more commercial environment in terms of a utility organisation of recovering any invoices that are not paid. And then delving down into those core documents, the statement of expectations we've spoken about previously, water services strategy that will replace our what we know and love as our infrastructure strategy, so for water services. So that will become very much within the water services realm and will no longer appear in council's infrastructure strategy. Claire.
Can I just jump in there on the debt collection powers? Because my understanding is the CCO can set penalties, but they can't enforce payment, you know, like the same powers that a council has. And I was a bit worried about that actually, because if people are determined not to pay, you really are very limited in your ability to collect it. And whether or not it would be necessary for the powers that a council has as well. But I mean, you know, they're pretty far reaching, like, you know, in the end, you know, like you add it to any mortgage repayment arrangements or when the property gets sold. Yeah. So any comment from staff or office on that point?
Sorry, good point, and I'll look into that. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, with my former litigation lawyer hat on, remedies in terms of recovery are both expensive, time-consuming and challenging. So yeah, I think it would be well worth, you know, just inquiring as to whether there was an ability to extend further powers beyond just those normal debt recovery.
It'd be good to know how Watercare handle it, because they probably have got similar constraints.
Not under the current legislation. They can register it against the title and recover when the property's sold or treated as a rates, not non-payment like council can. Yeah, so.
Just on that, because electricity authorities don't have the power to do a forced payment, but you can turn the power off, right? So maybe this requires clarification that unpaid water charges could lead to the water being turned off, because it's like a human right virtually getting water. So it is a tricky issue, and it raised my sort of concern as well as like, how are we going to deal with this?
Yeah, it specifically says they can't withdraw supply.
Yeah, well, in that case, why is anyone going to pay?
That's right.
Watercare does have a restricted flow mechanism that they use. So there's a minimum flow under the World Health Organization guidance, which is quite small. It's like, I'm not exactly sure of the number, but it's something like 14 litres a day or something per house. So they can restrict the flow to that minimum requirements to meet World Health Organization guidance, which basically means you've got limited supply of water into your house, which is an encouragement for people to pay before it gets to more extensive measures.
Just to add, I know overseas there's provision, that very point about not cutting off water, there's a minimum allowance that has to be provided free of charge. Yeah.
Great, we'll capture that one. So in terms of, we've spoken to Commerce Commission in terms of their oversight of water services providers, and within the legislation, sorry, there is that formal notification of that, and that ring fencing rule as to whether it's within a council or however that is managed, is that complete transparency in terms of the cost flowing back to the transparency of where costs are recovered from. We've spoken earlier this morning in terms of the water quality requirements and the Water Services Authority, and a change in terms of the Te Mana o Te Wai status, and in terms reverting back to the RMA requirements and the honouring of agreements in place that are under Part 5 of the RMA. And this is when we start to get into that nomination of minimum standards and performance requirements. As I say, they are under development, but they will still take a lesser precedence to where JMA agreements, excuse me, or that nature are already in place that specify those minimum requirements. So it will step in the absence of those other things. It will, we're hoping it will underpin, excuse me, and reinforce in terms of that catchment-based analysis and assessment that we spoke about previously. With respect to stormwater, so this part of the legislation, lovely, thank you, is where it gives us the guidance in terms of how stormwater will be managed into the future. It certainly acknowledges the integrated management of stormwater services and some of those challenges we were facing previously in terms of the National Transition Unit and the DIA requirements in terms of stormwater, understanding its tentacles are pretty extensive across the wider council business. And alongside that, there are some more plans in terms of the water organisations or councils to comply with, and these are starting to move in line with what we know now around our comprehensive stormwater discharge consent, that practice is being brought through and considered in this. So bringing those responsibilities, working with landowners, and particularly that protections in place for overland flow paths. So coming out very much of the experience of some of our towns and cities through recent flooding events and the protections that are needed.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dawn. I'd like to ask some clarity around the need for councils to do this planning work, but not able to charge, like it's the responsibility of the councils, and it states in the legislation or the commentary that I read that it can't be part of the water consumption charges, So that kind of doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why this work can't be done, but because there's people that are connected to those networks are benefiting from it. I don't know why it has to be a cost that has to stay with the council, and then I presume it's an overhead that goes out to all ratepayers, like, what do you think we should be saying, that it should be possible for the CCO to be able to charge the cost of that back to the connected consumers in that?
My initial thought is that generally speaking, for the majority, they're the same pockets that are paying. To my mind, as a council, whenever we go through looking at our financing and revenue strategies and the like, we make assessments in terms of public good. And so a part is a charge against activity and a part is a public good. To my mind, this has such significant benefits to all of our community that personally, a personal view is that I think it's appropriate that it comes back and sits with a council in terms of that wider benefit. So in the memo provided, we've provided a list of where we believe submission points. We've also the LGNZ submission that was shared with you earlier this week. I believe that they've raised some very good points. But yeah, overall, support the purpose of the bill. It's helping us in terms of developing up and shaping up what that future delivery model is for the best for our communities. One thing we're concerned about and starting to think about, an aspiration that I think is quite well supported around this table, is that future CCO merger. And that's not necessarily well provided for in this legislation. And we want to ensure that it's both supported, encouraged, and that there are no legislative barriers to doing that, so that it can be done in a very efficient and effective way. Working through in terms of the transfer of assets, we believe that there is some strengthening wording required in there as to the assets that are transferred, and getting that absolutely accurate and non-ambiguous at that point. Powers of entry. So this was something I know that through previous entity sort of discussions in water reform, in terms of councils have particular rights of entry onto property in terms of addressing issues. We want to ensure that those are replicated within any water services organisation that is separate to a council, and therefore not carrying those wider delegations. Lou.
Could I just ask a quick question? Because dealing with civil defence, if we have the power of entry as a control, or as in a civil emergency, we have to give notification, a written notification that we do come on. We can't just have the power to walk on. We've actually got to give notification to the individual property owner. So are they comply? They are not going to comply with that. They're going to just have the right to walk on, or do they have that power having to be signed by either the council or the water entity?
I wasn't aware of the emergency management function, so please forgive me on that one. But certainly from a waters perspective, in terms of the delegations under the LGA, is that our water staff have quite, I guess, they've got to operate within the rules and restrictions around those delegations about where they exercise them, but they've got basically their ability to go in. So if we've got a surcharging wastewater manhole, we've got quite strong rights to be able to go onto that property and resolve that, because it's creating a public health issue. And we just feel that our reading of the current legislation is not as enabling as we have it at present. And as I say, when you kind of have that sort of incident happening, you want to be able to address it pretty quick. We would never exercise it without speaking to the property owner and hopefully working with them. But worst case scenario is that we do have powers of entry.
Well, the only reason I asked that is that I wasn't actually thinking of stormwater, drains or things like that, but particularly of where we had freeways where stormwater ran down an area on a farm or a property, and you had situations where people grew crops or whatever. You've got to look at the situation that there's got to be communication, and there's between the farmer and or whoever owns the property and the people actually doing that. I just wondered at the height of that, how it works, because we still have the Human Rights Act, or the Property Owners Act, so yeah, you have to comply with those.
Compliance costs, so acknowledging in terms of there are still some functions that sit back with council, making of bylaws, some of those catchment plans, and just wanting to, I guess, reinforce that they will not come under the scrutiny of the economic regulator. The fact that they sit back with council, so just being very deliberate about that one. And the other one, novating of contracts. We have a number of both agreements and contracts in place that we believe will have to transfer across to a water services organisation. We want that to be as seamless as possible. So it's ensuring that those processes are in place. I know that our northern neighbours are quite concerned in terms of particularly developer agreements, that there may be some challenges in terms of how the legislation is currently drafted, which is unhelpful.
Claire. Yes, thanks. I'm pretty comfortable with all of the submission points. I read all of the submissions from the other, LGNZ and Taituara and all that, and Waikato Water, they're all really great. I just wanted to emphasise the points that the LGNZ submission made on the absence of any specific objective that addresses cost effectiveness. And they recommended that that be a standalone direction in the legislation. And also that there's nothing about the water entity exhibiting a sense of social and environmental responsibility as well. I felt really strongly about those 2 points, and I'm really appreciated if that could be added to our submission. And the other thing that the LGNZ one emphasised was the need for that planning, I think, alignment and integration with local authority planning. And that's come through in a lot of our discussions about how future-proof will work and all that kind of thing. And I think I'd appreciate that being emphasised as well.
Thank you.
And moving through, so the last couple of points there in terms of RTP amendments. So we just want to be very clear, because of course that will have an impact particularly on us. So Diana has drafted some wording in terms of ensuring we've got that well outlined in terms of what our concern is. And then the last one there in terms of our ability to charge customers where they have a reticulation that they could connect to, but they're not, but they cover the cost of provision of reticulation. So that minimum charge type sort of thing. So we want to ensure that that provision is there, because we feel that's a fair and reasonable spread of cost across consumers. So Carl's very kindly drafted up some words for us on that space as well. So. And yeah, absolutely. I thought the LGNZ, I concur. I thought their submission was very good in terms of a number of areas.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm in the wrong section here, but just to reiterate, it's actually way back on page 7, but it's got here around water quality regulatory framework. This includes reducing regulatory burden on small suppliers by excluding no unshared domestic suppliers serving 25 consumers or more. And that just, it picks up on a lot of, it could be, I don't know, Papakaina, it could be farms, it could be those sorts of things. I think that's a sensible, that was one of the concerns with the last piece of legislation. but it looked like an effective one, but this actually, to me, makes common sense.
Fabulous. We'll pick that up and ensure we provide that support. So as I say, we'll be operating within a delegation in terms of making sure that we've got submitted by, excuse me, Friday, the 21st of February. So make sure we hit that deadline and the report will come back to you on the 26th of February.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, team. Any last questions for them before we sneak off? No? Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Now we will end our live stream and return